I will be reading today from The Legend of Vivia Thomas, a novelette in poems, and I'm going to begin with the prologue. There is no doubt that Vivia Thomas was a real person, that she lived, died, and was buried at Fort Gibson National Cemetery in Fort Gibson, Oklahoma in 1870. Almost everything else about the woman's life is a question mark, surrounded by mystery and conjecture. In fact, her story is not one of biography, but of legend. When I first read about Vivia's fascinating life, or at least the stories that have been created about her, I knew that I wanted to learn more. And if that proved impossible, then to create my own tales about her, to make her a living, breathing person. Just like Vivia, we will all live, die, and fade into obscurity. Unless, of course, we become legends, having our stories told around campfires. And who knows, maybe we will linger nearby, listening. My birth, 1840. My grandmother once told me, when my mother was not near, for such matters were not discussed among ladies, that I was born without breath, blue as the moon on the Boston snow that night in January, when I made my entrance into this world. The doctor, a friend of my father's, would have declared me dead had it not been for the quick action of an Irish girl, hired as a wet nurse only the day before, after her child had succumbed to a fever at 2 weeks of age. Adine was her name, and she took my limp body in her rough hands, chafed my chest. Then, according to grandmother, she put her mouth to my lips, breathed her own life into mine, saying a Hail Mary every time she raised her head to draw a breath. My family was not Catholic, and her words surely sounded like a spell, an incantation, as she called to her Holy Mother, desperate to save this baby, a baby not of her womb. Her magic worked, and I gasped air, screamed my way into this life. Perhaps, as I look back now, it would have been better if the peasant girl had wrapped me in the soft shawl my mother had knitted, had hurried from the house to bury me beside her little one, maybe making a bargain with her gods, an exchange of one child for another, a soul for a soul, one much worthier than mine. Adine. My mother did not recover from my birth for some time, having just delivered my brother only a year earlier. There had been 3 girls and 2 small white crosses in the graveyard before the birth of Charles. So he was greeted with great jubilation, named after our father. My brother carried sunshine on his shoulders, and years later, when I saw drawings of Atlas in my school books, the god bearing the world, I thought that it looked like Charles if the orb had been glowing and warm. So I was left to Adine. Is it possible to possess a memory from such an early age? There are times I seem to capture a moment from long ago, being cradled in her warm arms, my face pressed against her soft breast, everything soft as I twirl a red curl that falls softly down her shoulder and listen as she sings a soft song whose words I do not know, but which always brings a soft tear that drops onto my upturned, adoring face. Alone. When Aideen and I were alone, she dressed me in my best coat, forest green in color with a collar of red fox fur, and we ventured into a world of noise and smells, a society I would never have known existed, protected as I was, like a daguerreotype behind glass. We walked away from the granite-stoned streets outside my home to clustered shops where women haggled over the cost of cabbage. She held my small gloved hand, shoved her way through crowds of people disheveled in their destitution, desperate from deprivation. But not one ever made a move to harm me as Aideen navigated us through the seas of humanity. And no matter our errands, we always ended at a cemetery devoid of tombstones and monuments like the ones in the graveyard behind our church. Markers were nothing more than flat stones stood upright, blank and moss-covered, or twigs bound together with twine, leather. Kneeling, she whispered a prayer to clutched beads while I stood in silence, wishing she loved me as much as the bone child beneath the ground. Torn away. How strange the passage of time when one is a child. Long, languorous days of summer, sun-silken and warm, dappling through elms. Hours crawl like common garden snails, content to inch from peony stalk to dahlia stem. Drowsy dreams fill the daylight like a sated bee dozing inside a blossom. I remember thinking my blessed life would always be like this. Even my mother, cold in her affections most of the time, would stroke my hair as I lay my head on her lap, as we lounged on a wicker settee under an arbor of wisteria. 5 summers passed in this way. One day, as I plucked a rose for Aideen, she brought her hands to her face and wept great breathless sobs caught in her throat, and I asked if a thorn had pierced her hand. She drew me to her, saying no, her heart was pierced instead. Our time together was coming to an end. I was no longer a baby in need of nurture, but a child old enough to learn real lessons, reading, writing, all of the wonders she had never known. Within the week, a governess would be arriving to take her place. I placed my face against her cheek and sent up a howl that filled the August air. But nothing would ever fill my own emptiness. Thank you.